Hey everyone, welcome to Binge Watch Brittany. So, in today's episode, we are going to be talking about The Night Agent Season 2. So, let's go ahead and get into it. So, I did watch Season 1 and I really loved it. I binge watched it with my sister Whitney, and normally we don't do that because whenever we start a show together, we end up not finishing it, and I really hate that because I just love to binge watch TV shows and just kind of keep watching episode after episode, and she doesn't really do that. So anyway, we watched season 1, we loved it, we knew that season 2 was coming out, and so we were really excited for it. We did watch maybe the first 3 episodes I think together, then we watched like the next 2 or 3 on our own, and then we watched one more episode I think, and then she ended up finishing it actually before I did because when we were on maybe episode 5, I think, I got distracted and didn't continue watching, but she did, and she assumed that I would have kept watching, and so she tried to finish it so that she could match where I was, but I ended up not watching, so I was actually behind her, and I was super annoying, but yeah, we finished the show, really loved it, and so let's go ahead and spend this episode diving in. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and talk about our top 5 moments. So, what we have happening as our top moment number 1, Rose finds Peter using adverse. So, Rose and Peter have gone their separate ways, and Peter ended up joining the Night Watch. So, he basically is a FBI asset. He needs to cut personal ties so that he can focus on his job, and that the people who are in his life are not compromised because of who he is and all of that stuff. And so Peter is on a mission. We see that he has a new partner named Alice, and they end up tailing some suspect or organization that they are trying to watch and kind of get insight into. And what happens is Peter and Alice, they split up. They realize that they're made and they're trying to get extracted. And as they're going to the extraction point, the bad guys basically catch up with Alice and they kill her in front of Peter. Peter is able to get away, but at this point, because he knows that those guys were able to figure out where they were going, he thinks that something within the night watch is compromised, and so he doesn't know who to trust, and he essentially goes on the run, which is alarming to his handler, his supervisor, Catherine. And so while all of this is happening, Rose and Peter, I guess they haven't really talked in 10 months. They tell this timeline in the show, and basically what happens is we see that Rose is working. She's not a CEO, she's working as a top engineer, and she's also in therapy dealing with everything that we saw in season 1. And she's in the middle of a presentation, and she gets a call, and it's someone asking her about Peter. And she doesn't really know this person, but she's stupidly answering all of the questions basically that person is asking her, and so she knows something might be wrong with Peter and she wants to find him. And so with adverse, it's basically a system that allows you to basically look at someone and figure out like their social media profiles and all of that, and basically figure out how to advertise to that person. And so she tweaks it so that she can find Peter, and she's able to find him based on basically not screenshots, she's able to find him based on selfies that people are posting online with him in the background. And so she finds out that he's in New York, he's at this urgent care, and so she flies there, and she's just going to the different places that she's seen him at to figure out where he would have gone next. And so she ends up going to this like hotel, hostel, whatever, temporary shelter place, whatever, that Peter was staying at, and she's able to get the guy to give her more information. So basically she ends up tracking him down to a basketball court, and what we see at the basketball court is that she runs into this kid that Peter is training as far as basketball, like he's his coach or whatever. And let me back up a little bit. So Peter at this point is still tracking the person that him and Alice were after, and that guy's name is Warren, and basically he is getting close to Warren's family so that he can find Warren. And I can't recall Warren's son's name, but Peter obviously gets really close with him, and he's using that kid to find Warren, and Warren is actually trying to get in touch with his kid and meet up with him so that he can basically kidnap him and take him somewhere else, because Warren and his wife, they divorced Warren lost the house, he lost custody, and he has to stay away from his son, which is not good. So he's really upset about that. We do see this moment where Warren showed up at the basketball game. He's trying to get his son to go with him. They leave and they head to the airport, and we see Peter and Rose show up. Warren and Peter get into a fight, and then Rose is able to get the son back to the mom. And so we see Peter interrogating Warren. Warren is telling him, hey, I'm selling information, and then Peter's trying to get through to him by talking about his father, who is a known traitor, and so he's basically trying to convince Warren to do the right thing at this point so that his son can remember him for the good things that he did. And so Warren basically tells him, hey, I'm just giving information to these people, I don't know who's in charge, that sort of thing, and then Warren is shot in the head. And Peter is quick to react, he hides, and then the phone is ringing, he answers it, and he figures out that the people in Bangkok who were after him, or who he was following, are now after him because they know that he's seen Shoot Guy's face. So just to tell you about some of the other storylines going on, we have Noor also in the mix, and she is a assistant at the Iranian mission. She wants to defect and get her family out of Iran. While all of this is happening, we see that she is attracting the attention of Javad, if I'm saying his name correctly, and he's kind of weird and he's a psycho, and this is obviously something that she uses to her advantage, but as time goes on, we see that something is really off with him, and he looks very pretty, but he also looks very weird as well. So anyway, we have Noor kind of defecting, and she's giving intelligence to the CIA, and her handler is kind of cold. He doesn't really want her to do this, but he's also kind of encouraging her to do it because he knows that she needs to. And so she's giving him stuff that he's basically like, we can't do anything with this. And so she has to up the stakes so that the CIA, are willing to take her on as an asset and protect her and get her family out of Iran. So I want to highlight here that Noor is initiating all of this. They did not come to her to try to get her to betray Iran or anything like that. This was initiated by Noor. And so we have Noor having that conversation with her handler, and so now she is following Javad and Abbas, who is Abbas. He is the diplomat for Iran, and basically she is trying to figure out where he has a meeting that he scheduled himself, and Javad won't tell her where it is, so she buys a tracker and she puts it in his coat, and then she follows them to that meeting location. And she's kind of really stupid during this process because as part of like the culture, she has to cover her hair, and so when she's not at the mission, she takes that off and she's just wearing the jacket that she normally wears, and she's putting sunglasses on, so she's easily recognizable. I mean, but if the men haven't seen her without her hair covered, maybe they wouldn't recognize her, but she's not doing much to disguise herself, is my point. And so anyway, she is following them. She goes to a cafe next door. She sits right in the window, and she's just taking pictures of Solomon going in and out, and she notices that he hands off a briefcase to Abbas and Javad, and then we also see her crossing the street to get a up close face picture of Solomon as he's walking away, and then at the same time, Abbas and Javad, they also are leaving the building, and there's this moment where she was spotted by Javad, but he wasn't really probably paying enough attention to realize, hey, that's Noor, what is she doing, why is she here, that sort of thing. So with Noor taking these pictures, she ends up sending them to her handler, and this leads her to get kind of like upgraded priority or whatever, and she gets assigned a new handler who happens to be Peter, who brings Rose along. So moving on to my second point. So this is probably going to be controversial, but Noor gets Farhad killed. So Noor's whole thing is that she wants to get her family out of Iran, and she is able to help them identify Solomon with her tracking Abbas and Javad. And so they figure out who this guy is, and I don't recall exactly what they do, but with adverse and maybe some of her other skills, Rose is actually able to find who Solomon is. Like, they created a new identity for him, and she's able to basically exclude the new identities that were created after a certain point so that she can search anything that happened prior to them basically wiping out his information. So she's able to find out that he was a former Marine who is reported as dead, and he has a sister. So they end up going to the sister's house, and the sister's name is Celeste, and she's living off of Solomon's benefits. She is in a wheelchair. She is disabled. She was hit in a hit and run, and she lost the use of both of her legs. And so we see them show up at her house. They're pretending that Rose is the daughter or whatever of someone who was Solomon's boss or whatever. And so Celeste is having a conversation with them. She's a little defensive. And what we find out later is that Catherine ends up going back to that house to get more information from Celeste or whatever. And Celeste basically moved out overnight. So this tells us a few things: that she was, one, suspicious of them coming around and talking to her about her brother, but also it lets us know that she's probably in on the fact that her brother is alive. Now at this point, Noor needs to find out what is in the briefcase before basically Peter and co will agree to protect Noor and get her family out of Iran. So this leads to them needing to go to a party that Abbas is hosting, and this will allow them to be able to sneak into his office, open the briefcase, and take pictures of whatever the paperwork is. And so the plan is for Rose to go to the party with another kind of like asset. I can't recall his name at the moment, but he's a much older man, and they are there kind of as a couple, as a date, whatever. And then Noor is obviously working the party. Peter gets a catering gig at the party so that he can be the one to slip away and go into Abba's office to take the photos of the paperwork. But he gets called back for to help do something else that's catering related, and then he actually ends up being detained by Javad, and they question him because of how he walks, the things that he's noticing as far as how Peter is moving throughout the party and all of that stuff. So he is knocked out of play when it comes to taking the photos that they need. So Noah, for whatever reason, she can take the photos, but she's too scared at this point. Like, she's spooked by Peter being knocked out of play. And so this puts Rose into play. Rose is actually not supposed to be doing any of this, and so Peter told Rose that if he gets caught or anything like that, she needs to just abort the mission and walk out. And she's about to walk out, but then she changes her mind and she agrees to take the phone from Noor and go upstairs and basically take the photos. And so she's able to get upstairs, and she breaks open the briefcase. She's taking her sweet time putting all the papers in place and then taking pictures. She ends up doing all of that with no issue, but when she's leaving, they have a tight window of like 15 minutes to do all of this without being caught on camera. And so as the cameras come back on, we see her run into Noor's friend, Hela, if I'm saying her name correctly, and she notices that Rose has a phone, and she's questioning her about it because nobody was supposed to have a phone in order to get into the party. So she pretends like she just found it, and then she hands it to Hela, and then from that point, everything seems like it is fine. However, because Javad noticed Peter and everything like that, they're kind of suspicious, and so they're going through the security footage to figure out what happened. And Javad comes across the footage of Hela running into Rose, and he's questioning Hela to figure out what was going on, because at this point Hela is getting all of the blame because she was the one who basically arranged the party, approved the guest list. She was working on it late one night, and Noor came in and was like, hey, I'll help you finish so you can go be with your husband, whatever. And she added an extra name to the list. And then also Hela picked the catering company, and the catering company that they had used previously had went out of business, so she had to find a new one. And basically Javad is saying that she is connected to all of the things that went wrong or went weird that night. And so she is being questioned. She's uncomfortable, clearly, because Javad is a psycho. And so she ends up saying, hey, this is my phone. I left it somewhere and she found it, blah, blah, blah. But then he notices somehow, and I don't even know if it was clear in the video, but he notices that it's not the same phone in the video. So she has to come clean and say that it was Noor's phone. So, on the flip side of all of this happening, we have Noor really pushing the night watch to get her family out of Iran and do it quickly. So, they have like 24 hours to basically put a plan into place, go to Iran, get her family, and bring them back. And so, Sammy is this guy that they bring into the picture. He was previously in jail. Catherine got him out and then made him basically an offer to join the night watch, and then he basically is a night agent. And so he is Iranian, I think, and he speaks Farsi, so he's the perfect person to go into Iran and get her family out. And so this is a huge, huge turning point in the season, I believe, because here we have, up until this point, we have Noor talking about how she wants to basically defect. She wants to get her family out of Iran. She really loves New York. She's not supposed to. She is supposed to be excited to be going back to Iran at some point, but obviously that's not what she wants. She wants to stay in New York. And additionally, what we find out is that her mother is writing these controversial articles or newspaper articles, whatever, and so she is at war with the Iranian government. And so, anyway, it makes sense that Nora and her mother would be okay with leaving. So we have Sammy kind of getting into Iran. He pulls up to like the village or whatever where her family lived. He knocks on the door. The mother obviously knows that he's coming. We see Farhad on the phone with his girlfriend. He's on a video call. He's confused about why someone is at the door. And what we find out is that the mom did not tell Farhad that they were leaving, and she didn't do that because she knew that he was basically going to run away. This was a huge mistake because Farhad does not want to go. He's supposed to be conscripted to the military. He seems to be really excited about it, and he is pushing back heavily about not wanting to leave Iran, and he's making a huge scene, and he's actually attracting the attention of their neighbors. And so what we see is that Sammy, the mom, and Farhad are basically having this dispute about what needs to happen. The mom is trying to convince Farhad to play along. He's not having it at all. And then we have Sammy, I think maybe at some point calling, and he's like, hey, the brother's putting up a fuss. He doesn't want to go. He didn't know we were leaving and all of this stuff. And so Noor has to convince her brother that, like, hey, you need to leave. I'm putting myself at risk. If you stay, it's going to be bad. And so he agrees to go, but as they're trying to leave, a neighbor comes, and I guess because of the culture, the mom doesn't really have enough say to get the guy to back off. The neighbor feels like it's his place to intervene and figure out what's going on, because obviously they don't recognize Sammy and he sounds different as far as like he has an American accent or whatever, and so they're suspicious of him. They get the neighbor to go away, but he comes back with friends and weapons, and so they basically have to fight their way out of the neighborhood and get away. And so at this point, the police have been called. They're able to get into the car, but then they get stopped kind of on the way to the airport. They get pulled over by the cops. You hear the cops asking for his ID and all of that stuff. Sammy is trying to make sure that the cops just talk to him, but the cops want to talk to the people in the back seat, which are the mom and Farhad. And at this point, Farhad has gotten a video call or a call from his girlfriend, and so he wants to change his mind. He doesn't want to go anymore, and so he starts acting up. And then at the same time, while the police are checking Sammy's license and all of that stuff, they get like a call or whatever saying, hey, be on the lookout for the car that Sammy is driving. And so this puts them in a bad position because Sammy now has to kill the cops. And so he kills the cops. He's going to kind of get his information and stuff like that. And Farhad picks up the cop's gun and he tries to shoot at Sammy. He misses because he doesn't know what he's doing. And so Sammy has to shoot him and he ends up killing him. And so Sammy has to basically drag the mom to the car, handcuff her to keep her in the car and drive them to the airport. And so at this point, Peter gets a call and Sammy is basically saying, hey, things didn't go well. The brother is killed. And Peter decides to lie to Noor and tell her that everything is fine. And the reason why he does this is because they need the evidence that she had, and she's not going to hand it over if she knows that her brother is dead. Once Noy leaves, because I think she's getting a call from work, she said that she had a doctor's appointment, and so she has to deal with the phone call. And Rose and Catherine are looped into the fact that things did not go as planned, and Rose is really upset that they are willing to lie to Noy. She wants to tell them the truth, and so when Noy comes back into the room, she realizes that something is off, something is wrong, and she wants to talk to Rose privately. So they go and talk, and Rose ends up lying to Noy after making a big deal about Peter lying to her, which is super annoying. And she's able to get the documentation from Noy, so then they move on. And so what happens is that when Noor goes back to the mission. They want to talk to her because at this point they're very suspicious of her, but at the same time they've gotten word that her brother has been killed. So they pull her into the room to tell her, hey, your mom is missing, your brother is dead, and so she's finding out the truth. And so at this point, what she wants to do, I don't know if it's the same day or the next day, she ends up going to meet with Peter and Rose, and she confronts them about what happened to her brother. She doesn't believe that her mother is safe, and she wants to talk to her mother and all of this stuff, and they just are having a hard time getting in touch with Stanley. They can't call, or they don't want to call, and so at this point, Nora's kind of on the outs with them, and she ends up leaving, and Javad actually followed her, and he's taken all of these photographs of her leaving that meetup spot, and then he also catches Peter and Rose leaving, so he knows that she's working with them because he recognizes them from the footage that he has from the party. Going into my third point, so Rose ends up finding the doctor who can help with locating or retrieving the chemical weapon. I can't recall the doctor's name, so I do apologize. I'm just going to refer to him from this point forward as the doctor. And so at this point, the gang knows about Foxglove, and they know that someone is stealing chemicals and building a weapon based on everything that was part of Foxglove. And the team that is stealing the weapon is Tomas Bala and his family and all of that stuff. They are wanting to get revenge on the Americans, on the UN, and so they are stealing all of these different chemicals. At the same time, Catherine is able to connect with someone that she's blackmailing to get her a intro to Solomon and his boss. And her connect, I can't recall the connect's name, but she ended up getting killed for referring Catherine to Solomon because Solomon's like, this has never happened. I don't know why you did this. And then he just shoots her. While all of this is going on, Peter is basically at the location. He's keeping an eye on Catherine. But what they realize is that Solomon's team is listening to their comm, and they kind of know where Peter is trying to go. And so they know that something is going to go wrong. They know that this might be an ambush. And so it is an ambush, and the guy, Solomon, kills the Connect, and then Catherine is on her own to handle Solomon. Peter is able to get in, and they are able to disarm Solomon and bring him in for questioning. So going back to Tomas Bala and Victor Bala. So basically, Victor Bala is in jail for war crimes. We know that his son is kind of like the head or the next in line of whatever of their family, but there's also this other guy, Marcus, who's from the Vampire Diaries, by the way, and he is basically a little bit more ruthless. He's a little bit more of a soldier, and he is kind of pushing Thomas out of the way because basically Thomas was raised kind of like as a soft kind of guy who kind of did like the fruitier stuff or whatever of life, and so he's not built for this life, and so Tomas does not like being pushed out, and he wants to step up and take more responsibility because he feels like Tomas is basically forgetting his place and kind of deviating from the plan that they have to basically make the Americans and the UN pay for what they're doing to Victor Bala. So at this point, we have the gang. They know about Foxglove. They find a list of doctors. Rose ends up going to locate the doctor at his university while Peter and Catherine are basically questioning Solomon. And so Rose ends up at the university. She's trying to talk to the doctor. He's apprehensive. He realizes what's going on, and he wants to talk more at his house, and he has more documentation and everything like that. So he's telling Rose all of this stuff that is going on, and he's telling her basically how he was involved with this plan to produce a chemical weapon. They were also supposed to produce the antidote, whatever, and they, I guess, didn't get to complete all of the work, and then the project was scrapped, and he was not supposed to talk about it. But then I think he found out about one of the weapons being used somewhere else, and so he knew that basically the plan wasn't going well. And so Rose shows up and he invites her to stay for dinner. While they are kind of like trying to wrap up, she sees Marcus and Tomas and their crew outside, and they are there to kidnap the doctor so that they can force him to make the chemical weapon for them. And what happens is they end up getting caught because Peter is now aware that Rose is at risk or whatever, and so he's trying to call her and make sure that she's okay, and this causes her phone to ring or vibrate, and while the guys are searching in the basement of the house of the doctor's office for them, they hear the phone, and then they're able to figure out where they are, and they end up taking them hostage and taking them to the mobile lab and forcing them to make the chemical weapon. Moving on to my fourth point, Peter takes Suit Guy up on his offer. So Peter's not able to get in touch with Rose, and so he is letting Solomon get in his head. Solomon has gotten him to confirm that the Night Watch exists, and then he's also able to get Peter to take him to his boss so that he can figure out what Suit Guy wants with him, because obviously Peter knows that Suit Guy knows that he knows who Suit Guy is, and so Peter is a liability for them, so they are basically trying to turn him and make him basically a double agent or whatever. So at this point, Suit Guy wants Peter to basically break into the UN to get some documents and paperwork that he needs because they are in the business of selling intelligence. So at this point, Peter realizes that he needs Nora's help. At this point, Nora has been exposed. Javad is questioning her. He's treating her differently. He's becoming a psycho. And so to save herself, she's like, hey, I can give you Peter. And so coincidentally, Peter ends up calling her for help. And she basically says, hey, I need to tell you something. I need to meet in person. And so this allows Javad and his team the opportunity to capture Peter and take him in for questioning at the mission. So while this is happening, Nora and Peter are having this conversation, and he's basically apologizing to her for what happened, and then they kind of make amends or whatever, and so she ends up telling him, hey, Javad's here, he's trying to take you in, and then he gives her a taser, and then he's basically prepared to defend himself against 3 or 4 men. And so Nora is being escorted back to the mission by one of the guys. She has a taser, so she tases him, and then she ends up running to the mission to do what she needs to do. And then Peter is able to fight off the 3 people, and he ends up getting in the car. It crashes because Javad is shooting at him. He has to quickly figure out how to get out of the car, and he is able to attack Javad, who is approaching the van with a gun. They fight and tussle, and then Peter ends up running away. Javad follows him. They end up going to a train station, and Peter's like waiting for the train to arrive, and he's looking out for Javad. Javad sneaks up on him and punches him. They're fighting and stuff like that, and then Peter is able to knock Javad out enough that he has time to get on the train, and the doors can close before Javad can get on the train. And so Peter is taken away. Back to Nora, she's at the mission. She's trying to make Peter a badge so that he can get into the UN. And what happens is she's done making the badge and she's trying to leave, but Abbas comes to his office, or to Javad's office, and he spots her. And so they come to the realization that the paperwork that was in the briefcase actually has the location of Iranian dissidents, or people who are basically defecting or betraying the country, and Abbas's daughter's name is on that list, and people hate her because she ran off with a foreigner who was in Paris, whatever, and she's speaking out against Iran, and so she is on that list of people that they want to target, and obviously he wants to protect his daughter. Noor is able to figure this out, and she basically says, hey, give me the paperwork, I'll take it to the UN and make sure that they know about this list so that they can protect these people and your daughter. And he agrees to let her go, but then he just gives her 10 minutes because the plan is to pretend like she stole that information and he couldn't stop her. And so this is where we get this really weird exchange between Abbas and Javad. So we know that Javad is like this high-level security guy, but then we also know that Abbas is really kind of like the one in charge. And so we see the dynamic shift a bit because Javad is basically threatening him and saying, hey, I know about your daughter. She's mouthy. I know that she was on this list and you're probably doing some funny stuff. And Javad basically says that we can get another one of you, a diplomat, which is what Abbas is. And so we see that he is threatening him. And we've never really seen this because before it seems like Abbas is in control and Javad is doing what he says. And so we see this moment where it flips. And what ends up happening is Abbas doesn't take this very kindly. And so basically he is able to spin it and makes Javad out to be the traitor because Javad was obviously pursuing Noor, and so he is able to say that you are so in love with Noor, basically, that you either overlooked all of these things that she was doing or you were actively working with her. And so he basically sends Javad back to Iran as a traitor and as someone who is helping a traitor, so that's not going to be good for him. Moving on to my fifth point, Marcus takes over and kills Thomas. So now we're back at that mobile lab where Rose and the doctor and his family have been taken. They are forced to make 15 vitals or 15 canisters of the chemical weapon KX, and Rose is not supposed to be there. She doesn't know how to do anything with this science stuff, but in order for her to survive, she has to pretend that she is of value to them, basically. And so they do make a test file at first to kind of make sure that, I guess, they have made the chemical weapon KX correctly. And so the doctor is explaining the effects of that vial, and Tomas has taken Rose to a room, and he's basically trying to figure out who she is because he knows that she's not a scientist. And then she basically tells him, hey, I'm part of the FBI, the CIA, whatever. They're on their way here. You don't want to do this, basically. And she's able to convince him to kind of like shut everything down. But obviously we know that Marcus and Tomas are at heads with who is in charge and whose plan they're going to follow and all of this stuff. And so what happens is the doctor is basically told by Tomas to delay everything, and when Marcus is confronting them about not making progress, the doctor keeps looking at Tomas, and Marcus is able to figure out that something funny is going on, and so he ends up basically overthrowing Tomas, and he locks him in a fridge, and he has the vial, and he's basically telling him, you're not a good son, you don't deserve the bother name, you're a loser, all of this stuff, I'm taking over, and he throws the vial into the fridge, and he locks Tomas in, and obviously Tomas knows the implication of what this means, what's going to happen to him, because the doctor described how he would die, and so we see Tomas die. And what we also see is that at some point just after this, Marcus goes to some location and he's on the phone with Victor, and he has to tell him, hey, I had to kill your son, but he makes it seem like it was less shady than it was, and so Victor is probably never going to realize how his son was killed and why his son was killed. While all of this is happening, Rose and the doctor, they make 15 canisters, and then they're told to make more. And at this point, Rose and the doctor decide to make a fake batch that is not effective, but the coloring ends up being off, and they have the doctor's notes so they know that they're doing something funny. And so Marcus ends up bringing the doctor's wife, and he stabs her and says, hey, you need to make more of this chemical weapon KX. If you don't make it correctly, obviously your wife is going to die because now she had a certain amount of time to get help before she obviously dies. So while all of this is going on, Peter is able to get into the UN. He's able to connect with some guy, Lars, who's able to get him down to the basement where the archive is to get the files that he needs, and he's able to get that. He meets up with Suit Guy, and then he gives him the files, and Suit Guy tells him where Rose, the doctor, and the crew of people for the Bala family are located. And so Peter showed up, and at this point, Rose and the doctor have devised a plan to basically release some kind of like poison or something that will knock the other guys out so that they can escape. That ends up working out pretty well, actually. They just need to make sure that they wear masks so that they don't inhale the chemicals that is kind of floating around in the room. And so they're able to escape, but they run into one or two guys, and the dad, the doctor, is able to make it out with their daughter. She ends up running to Peter, and she sends Peter in with the mask to help out. The doctor goes back in to get Rose and his wife, and he ends up being attacked, and Rose and the wife have to hide in this car, and I think the doctor is dead. Peter comes in, and he's able to help Rose and the wife, and he ends up fighting off one guy, and Rose comes to the rescue. And I hate it when women come to the rescue and they don't really do anything, but Rose is very smart because she took off the guy's mask, and obviously that's bad, so the guy was like knocked out and whatever, and so they're able to escape. But at this point they realize that, or they acknowledge that Marcus already left the mobile lab. He has the canisters, and he had a plan to basically put the canisters in the UN building where a huge meeting is going down. And this is how they're going to get revenge on the UN and America, because at that meeting they are planning to divvy up the Bala territory into 3 separate territories, I think they said, and they want to send a message about everyone's involvement and just so that they can cause damage or whatever. And so what ends up happening is everyone rushes to the UN. They're able to locate the canisters and take out the Bala men. And then what happens is Marcus is able to get out with the last canister, and he's wearing a security uniform, but they have Rose kind of like in the command center identifying the different guys, and so she's able to identify Marcus. He's able to escape. He ends up going to Tomas's hotel or apartment, and his wife, girlfriend Salone is there, and she's trying to tell her, hey, Tomas said to get the jet ready, so he's lying to her. He's manipulating her just so that he can get out of the country, basically, and she's not playing along, and so he basically threatens her. And at this point, they know that Marcus has the 15th canister, so they're trying to figure out where he is going to go, and I think there's 2 locations. Peter and Rose end up going to the hotel where Salone is, and she answers the door, and she gives a distress signal that they pick up on, and she's very smart because she's not taking down lightly anything that Marcus is doing, and so while he's distracted, she hits him over the head with the vase. Peter's able to run in, but she gets taken captive or whatever, and then Rose is in the hallway kind of while all of this is going down, and she sees this HVAC guy, or this maintenance guy at the hotel, talking about something going wrong with the HVAC, and they realize where he put the 15th canister, and so what they have to do is basically figure out how to shut the HVAC so that when the canister is on a tripwire and it's set to go off at a certain point, basically, and so they need to figure out how to close the HVAC, but where it is, they can't close that manually, so they come up with a plan. Once Peter and Rose are able to disarm and kill Marcus, they then come up with a plan where they need to start a fire in like wherever the canister is so that it basically closes and traps the chemical in the HVAC instead of releasing it into the air. They are successful with disabling that plan, but at this point, with everything that Peter has done, he has to turn himself into Catherine because he went AWOL twice. He actively aided the enemy, so he has to turn himself in. And so he ends up, I guess, being imprisoned or whatever. They're questioning him. And what ends up happening is that the suit guy, we see him identified by name as James somebody, and he's working with some guy. I didn't know who he was at the time, but this guy is actually running for the presidential election. And so suit guy ends up giving that guy whatever was on those files that Peter gave him, and basically he is able to use it to get a candidate to drop out of the presidential election. And so once the Night Watch people see this, they realize what that guy is using that information for, and so they're concerned about this because that means that that guy can control a sitting president possibly, and they can't let this happen. So because this guy has made it clear that Peter is under his control now, that he owns Peter, they want to take advantage of this, and so they say, Peter, we're going to wipe your slate clean. You need to pretend like you're on this guy's side, figure out everything that's going on, and then destroy everyone. And so this is Peter's get out of jail free card, and this sets up season 3. So, all right, let's go ahead and wrap it up. So, one thing I want to call out is that with Peter and Rose in season one and season two, I think more so in season one, I could see the buildup of a romantic relationship. But in season two, they really gave off more best friend vibes than romantic vibes. So, I really don't believe the romance at all. And it really has the energy of Lauren London and Jonah Hill in that new movie that they did maybe like a year or two ago. Their romance was not believable at all. And I feel like Peter and Rose have the same kind of vibe. So it'll be interesting to see if they try to continue to push the romance angle or if it shifts into something else. So with all that being said, I'm really happy about season three. I think they set it up really well. My sister did say that she thought kind of season two was predictable at a certain point. I'm not sure if I feel that way, but I do know that I'm really excited for season three. I have no idea when that's coming out. Hopefully it does not get canceled. And I'm also very excited for the upcoming season for The Recruit, which should be out on the 30th. So I'm really, really excited about that. And so, yeah, that is everything that I have for this video. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.